this was a mistake, whether, I shouldn't have gone at all, whether I shouldn't have booked 3 before I knew how 1 was going to go, whether I shouldn't have gone all in to try and make it successful, where I shouldn't have gone in with so little information and strategy that would have helped me. But it's a mistake I've learned a ton from.
Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of My Biggest Marketing Mistake, the podcast where we transform costly failures into priceless insights. I'm your host, Kacy Maxwell, and today we're exploring an all too common mistake that is honestly rampant in the marketing world, and that is falling for those famous last words, "We've got to do it. It's a no-brainer." More on that in a minute. Now, we just hit episode 6 of season 1, and honestly, the stories just keep getting better and better. Now, you probably know that we're on Apple Podcasts and Spotify and Amazon and basically wherever you listen to podcasts, but we're also on YouTube as a video podcast. And if you're on YouTube watching this right now, you already know that, but if you're not, we are. But wherever you're listening or watching this podcast, make sure to subscribe because we have a lot more great episodes coming your way. Today's quote on failure comes from Charlie Munger, vice chairman of Berkshire Hathaway, and he's quoting Mark Twain. He says, "Many people have to learn the lessons of life the hard way through really terrible experiences." Mark Twain said that a man who picks up a cat by the tail learns something in a way that's much more effective than any alternative way. But that's a terrible way to learn things. And that's exactly why this podcast exists, so you can learn valuable lessons without going through all the pain. Now, today's episode dives into one of the most common traps in marketing, and that is the no-brainer. You know the type, the decisions that seem so obvious that they don't even need to be questioned. The things that usually fall into this arena is things you see your competitors doing, things that you've done in the past that were successful, or even things that are marketed to you really, really well. These are the type of things that make you think, what could go wrong? But like most things, sometimes they work and sometimes they go wrong. And when they go wrong, they can cost you big. And that's exactly what happened in our story today. So our guest today is George Stern, CEO of G&P LLC. And he joins us to share how this exact scenario played out for him in his business and why it didn't go like he expected. So George leads a holding company that acquires, manages, and grows small businesses. Each one's profitable, growing, and committed to giving back to the environment and their local community. He's the kind of leader who thinks long-term, values sustainability, and isn't afraid to learn the hard way, which is good for us. In this episode, we'll unpack George's recent failure when he chose to go all in on a marketing tactic without fully vetting the idea. And we're going to discuss how some marketing might not be ideal, even if it's in front of your ideal customer, how to balance gut and strategy, and how confirmation bias can make us ignore the red flags. There's lots to unpack today, and you're going to love George's story, and we're going to hear it right after this.
You want to grow, and you need a marketing partner to help accelerate the process. At Provisions Group, we take a comprehensive approach to marketing and technology to maximize impact and growth. We work alongside you to build and implement a customized marketing plan, and we help you optimize your tech stack so you can operate efficiently and securely. Plus, our tenured fractional advisors are here to partner with you to keep your objectives aligned and create a roadmap to success.
Well, George, excited to finally get to have this conversation in person and meet you. I know we've kind of connected on LinkedIn and we've had some conversations, so it's kind of cool to finally get face to face and talk through this, this failure, this mistake on the marketing side that you had. And so I start all of these interviews with one question of, why would you be willing to come on a podcast and talk about your failure? Like how have you come to terms with failure in a way that you want to talk about it on a podcast?
I'm so glad you asked that, Kacy, because I spend a lot of time on LinkedIn posting about this exact topic, which is that in order to succeed, we need to become a lot more comfortable with failure. And so this failure came about, we'll talk about, because we took a big swing. And I'm glad we took that big swing. We would have missed any potential upside if we hadn't. And that's been true throughout my career. that all of my success has come from some initial setback and then learning from it and then growing. And I think that growth mindset is important. And I think the more that leaders are talking about their failures so that folks are willing to put themselves out there and take risks, the better off we'll all be.
Yeah, it's funny. You mentioned you talk about it a lot on LinkedIn. Everybody talks about it a lot on LinkedIn, right? Failure is one of those things that people like to talk about. Oh, you got to fail and to grow, or fail to take these swings. But nobody really wants to dig into a specific failure. Like they like the idea of it in concept, but nobody is ever really posting, "Hey, here's a time I made a mistake." There's emotions and there's ego and there's a lot of stuff tied up in that. But one of the reasons I'm doing this podcast is because I think it's so valuable if you take the time to unpack it and look and say, what did we actually learn from this, right? Could we have known something that went a different direction? Maybe. But now that it's done, what have we learned that can make our decisions better? And so everybody listening to this, I want them to hear and think through, okay, if I'm making a similar decision, what are the things that played out in this scenario that can help me make a more informed decision when I'm making that for myself?
100% on that point. And when you asked me ahead of this, hey, will you think about some big mistake you've made in marketing? I was thinking through examples and I was like, I don't know if I want to do that one. I'm going to look pretty dumb on that one. And we're going to see here the one I chose. I mean, it was ultimately, I should have been a lot more thoughtful going into it. But I had exactly what you're talking about. I post about this all the time, the sort of in general focus on failure, embrace failure, be okay with failure. But when push came to shove and you put me there, I was having those hesitations because I was thinking, how is this going to look for me? My image as a CEO running a portfolio company, trying to raise money, trying to get people to sell me their businesses, trying to ultimately sell some of these businesses. And I had that pause, but I'm glad you're doing this because that vulnerability is important. Discussing it is important. And ultimately, I do really believe what I discuss and post about, which is that we are stronger because of our failures. So I'm glad we're doing this.
Well, I'm really glad you're here, and you're the CEO of a private equity firm, right? You own a lot of companies, and we're going to be talking about one of those companies today, and in a decision that you made there. Give us a little, kind of like set that scene. Tell us a little bit about the company, where it was, what you were trying to accomplish from a high level.
Absolutely. So this company sells outdoor equipment, specifically camping equipment, and we specialize in rooftop tents that go on the roofs of cars or trucks. So you'll see people driving around with these big box-like things on top of their car. They look like a Thule box, but they're a little more rectangular. These things have 3-inch mattresses. They're warm. They're plush. They're comfortable. They're great for young kids. I have one on top of my car that my wife and our 2 kids and I go camping in a lot. And so we saw this starting to take off, and we have been a retailer, the company that I now own. So it started before us, we acquired it, but a retailer in the rooftop tent space since 2020, selling other brands' tents in this market, and roof racks and bed racks and other accessories to give people the full package to get out for the first time into camping. And we started to develop our own line of products, trying to fill a need that we were seeing in the market and trying to overcome the fact that a lot of the brands that we were selling were pretty awful at supply chain management. And so they would be out of stock during busy season. And we're making sales, we're then having to cancel those sales. So for the 2 reasons, there being, some unmet needs in the market and these supply chain issues, we decided to enter in. We developed our own line of tent products, and it was that launch strategy where I was trying to figure out how we were going to market these things, and did so somewhat successfully, and in one way, not at all successfully.
Okay, so you've developed this line of products, and you're like, hey, we gotta get this out there. Tell me a little bit about the team. What sort of team on the marketing side did you have? Was this, hey, we didn't have anybody, we were working with an agency? Give me an idea of who was working on this project.
Yeah, so this specific company, which I've now owned about a year, and so when we were launching this, I'd owned maybe 5, 6 months. Very lean, and a lot of that the result of me still being pretty actively involved in it. When we first acquire companies, the one of my staff members at the holding company and I really dive in, try and, understand the business, work hard on the business to understand who we need to hire, where we can grow, to make sure that we're putting all of our time and resources into doing it. So there were four plus me at the time that this was happening, no one in marketing. So everyone, directly oriented around operations, with a customer service person, a fulfillment person, a website, and social media person, maybe adjacent marketing there, but with mostly just doing content we've done before, and then another person on sort of forward-thinking operations and products. And the reality of the business is we had never really spent a dime on marketing. It was an SEO-driven business with really solid traffic coming in each day to the site. And we were already selling a lot of other people's tents. These tents are very similar. And so the thinking was that traffic's not going anywhere. People come to us when they're trying to figure out what to buy when they're entering this space. We have all these helpful pages. We have all this helpful information. All we need to do is sort of slot our tents into the page of, 8 best tents, and we'll be off to the races. And so decided not to spend, except there were these things sitting out there, these expos that I got very interested in and decided that might be worth looking at.
So you had marketing. Everybody has a website. You had a brand. You had logo. You had a new product that you developed, and a lot of people in your situation kind of do the same thing. There's do I hire a fractional CMO, right? Or do I hire, a marketer or a set of contractors or an agency? And that's always the question, because it's not I say this almost every episode, marketing is an art, not a science, right? And so there's not necessarily a right or a wrong decision based on that, but there are things that not having someone who really, really gets marketing thinking about your marketing is that you lose a lot of the threads of tying everything together. You lose things of reaching out to your customer and really knowing, what they need and what they want. And what happens is, because the person leading marketing often is not doing those things, right? They're leading the company, right? You were leading that company as well as other companies, right?
That's a super good flag. I just want to underline here, because there was definitely my own ego at play here. I'm pretty good at sales and have been across my companies. I'm pretty good self-marketer, have a decently strong personal brand, and so I feel like I just sort of intuitively get that here. And so I came in thinking, look, I've got these 4 people managing the operations. I can market this thing. I can sell it. I can do it. No need to bring in other resources on it. This will be my focus. I won't be trying. I was at least self-aware enough to say, I'm not going to wear every hat. I'm not going to be doing this while doing customer service and operations and product design and everything else, but I'll be the marketing team. And that probably is why there ended up being some mistakes here.
Man, it's funny you acknowledge that, because marketing, a lot of times when it is just kind of done ad hoc, it's all led by gut. So let's talk a little bit about the expo, right? The conference that you decided to go to. So you've done some of these things on your site. You've already got some traffic. You're seeing some wins in SEO, and then you come across these expos. How did you find these expos, and what did you hope or expect that they would do for you?
Yeah, so we'd been in this space for a few years already, because we had been selling other tents brands, and every every year as expo season starts up, it's a very seasonal business because we're selling outdoor camping equipment. So it's essentially a March through September season. And every time when season would start ramping up, people would say to us, this is again coming from looking at a year ago, 2 years ago emails before I got the company. Hey, you guys going to Flagstaff for the big Expo West this year? Hey, you're gonna make it to Colorado for the Mountain West one? And we'd say, no, we're gonna keep just doing our online only thing right now, but the brands will be there. And that was the other thing we knew, is that everyone we were selling, all the major tent brands, went every year, and they loved it. And I had actually stopped by one in July or August of last year, just a month or two after I bought the store, and visited a lot of our brands and saw it. And it's impressive. It's huge. They advertise it, and I believe it, as 40,000 people coming through over 3 days. There's a couple hundred vendors all in this space. It seems like ideal client customer profile, is exactly who we want to be reaching, mass audience. And these are products that it's nice to be able to see them and try them and lie down on the mattress. The mattress should sell itself because it's so much more comfortable than any other camping mattress that there is. And so, I knew all the other brands were going. I knew that there were tens of thousands of people going. I knew that they were people who might ultimately buy our things. And so to me, it seemed like a no-brainer. It was why would I not be here? And this makes so much more sense than Kickstarter, where, most users are not anywhere near our ideal customers, especially because these tents are going for $2,000-$3,000 a pop. And so this is not a commodity product that most people are potentially interested in. And so, this, in terms of anything I could do, this one seemed like, yeah, if you could tell me I could have 40,000 customers, ideal customers, looking at my product in 3 days, like, duh, let's go. So I signed us up for 3 right away, the big 3 in Mountain West, Pacific Northwest, and West, and put down the deposits on getting the booth and everything else, and then started to figure out how we would go to these things and present and everything else.
Yeah, it's funny whenever you think something is a no-brainer, you typically look for things that assert that, right? That confirm that it's right. So everything you said is true in general about conference and expos. You're right? Like, if it's the right expo or right conference, there are going to be thousands of people there, right? And they are there with the intention of potentially choosing your product, right? Or your service. But there's a whole bunch of negatives that just come in general with conference or event marketing. And I think a lot of times people will go into those thinking, oh man, I'm just going to have 40,000 people see my brand. And what happens is you are a tiny, tiny fish in a gigantic sea. And you're kind of a fish, and there are a lot of people there that are sharks, right? Bigger, much bigger. They got giant booths. Like, their whole strategy is conference, right? Expo strategy. And they have all of these things in place. They're giving away cars. I've been to plenty of these things where the booth space is like 500 by 500, like, it's gigantic. And they've got football fields, and they've got cars, and they got and it's just, a lot of times when you're a first time going to these, you've got this small little 10 by 10 booth, and you got a background, and you bring some cups and some koozies, and you're like, hey, I'm sure I'm just going to get all these people to stand there. But if you've ever walked the floor of a conference, the amount of times that you just see these empty booths, or like nobody is going and talking to them, it's very sad. So the idea of a conference, the idea of that is solid and can work in certain situations. But there's also a lot of things that go into that. So talk a little bit about how you prepped for these expos. Like, you bought the big 3; those were tens of thousands of dollars, probably just to get the space, not to mention put the booth together and get all of the things together. How did you approach, with the team that you had, how did you approach saying, we're going to make this a success?
Yeah, well, in retrospect, I spent a lot too much time focused on making it a success. So we booked three. They were I think they were like May, July, and August or something like that. And so, then I had put those deposits down and started figuring out how we made May a success. We were probably 2 months out from that. So I had been to one before. I knew how these tents displayed. I did, to your point, I was going to have a smaller booth than most, but knew I wanted to have a car there to put one on top because you got to see it in its element. And that we wanted to have our whole line of products. So we had sort of two models of tents, but different sizes and things. So ultimately decided what we could fit in our booth, what would let us show off different sizes in the two different models was 3 tents. So now I need to get those 3 tents from my warehouse in Tulsa, Oklahoma to Flagstaff, where this first event's going to be. These things cost hundreds of dollars to ship, and I'm pulling them out of inventory, and they're now going to be heavily used. So, a few $1,000s on taking those tents out of inventory for show. Have to buy these bed stands essentially to display these on, because you need it to be strong enough that it can hold a 200-pound tent and several 100-pound people getting in it, if that's who comes by the booth, and not collapse on them and cause us any issues there. We were online only at that point, and so needed the banners and the flags and all of the branding materials that you have for things like that to make sure that we are attracting some people into our little corner of this massive ocean that we're displaying in, and prepared in every way we possibly could. Had to get a U-Haul to go on the back of my car, which we decided the tent would display on, to drive down the other tents and all of these things we'd bought. I couldn't work this booth alone for 3 days, 10 hours a day. Wanted to both build relationships with the other people there, but also be able to eat lunch and take a bathroom break. So flew out a staff member full time, so had to pay for his travel and his overtime pay working on Saturday and Sunday and a long day Friday. We had and we were there early to set up and everything else. So it went pretty big. To me, this was, though, on these tents, right? If we're selling our own tents, the margins are good. And so it was like hey, I know I'm spending a lot of money here, but I need to sell like 15, 20 tents to make this all break even. And even if I don't do that, 40,000 people seeing it, some of them no doubt will go back and buy one over the course of the coming months after they've compared other people's. And so getting our brand out there, making people aware, the right people aware that we have these products, is a good long-term investment. Let's do it. We'll get some sales. It will, if it doesn't even out by Sunday at the end of the 3-day conference, it will within a couple weeks, was my naive thinking going in.
So everything you described, every time you said another thing, I just heard like a cash register, ching, ching. And it's one of those things that sometimes marketing does that. You have this idea, and then you make this initial investment, which was a big cash register ching of getting all of the, down payments. And then each time you made another decision, it just added up and added up and added up. And then you get into the whole sunk cost theory, like, well, we've already did this, and if we want it to be a success. And so you keep doing that. Everything that you talked about is great, right? We wanted to make this booth impressive, right? We wanted to make sure that everything that was happening in the space that we bought go well. What sort of time and thought and energy did you put into figuring out how to get people to the booth, and what happened post coming to the booth?
Some, not enough. So getting people to the booth, started from, it seems silly, but we were overly strategic about, we got to pick where our spot was on this gigantic airfield of a place that we were in, and, tried to figure out where traffic flow would be coming from the entrance, what competitors we wanted to be close to, what competitors we wanted to be nowhere near, where food was and how that would attract people. And ultimately, most people who had booked many, many months before I did, and had been 4 years in a row. So I probably was like, number 200 in getting to choose. And so I was choosing between not great and worse options. But I do think we chose the best booth spot of not great and worse options. And then, tried to do it in such a way that we had the big flags right out front. that we played up certain angles. I'm a volunteer firefighter, and we had a big, recognizable to anyone who is in the first responder community, firefighter flag. It's the big red stripe through it, and things like that to try and to attract folks who might have common interests or anything there. But ultimately, we were going off of very little intelligence, whereas most of the people around us had been there a lot of times, and we were doing giveaways to collect email addresses and get people's info and be able to do follow up and give them discount codes to entice them and give benefits to anyone who did things at the expo as opposed to after the expo. But ultimately, I think we just we didn't have enough experience to know what people were most likely to submit their email address for, or what was pen and paper versus tablet as the most efficient way to get people to give you that info. And those were things that now I have much better knowledge on, but did not have enough going in.
Attention is the hardest thing to get at a conference. Trying to get somebody who is not necessarily in there to buy your thing, right? That's a thing that people need to realize when they go to a conference, is that they're not coming there to pick between 6 of your specific things most often, right? They are the right target buyers, but they might not be even considering your solution. And so some of it is you've got to get them to see that. But there's a lot of stuff that you're going to have to do before and after and outside of your booth to get that to happen, because people will walk by and you may get a brand awareness touch, a look into the side, but you're not going to get as much value as you may think, which is why conferences and the conference strategy is so hard, right? Because it is not just, I'm going to get there and get a booth. It is everything that happens around that booth. And I want to dig into what were the metrics that happened after that, because I think that's important. Because again, it's not always what happens at the booth, right? It's not everything that just happens there. A lot of times, if you're able to connect enough emails and you're enough to reach out and your sales team, and you can close a lot of business depending on your sales cycle for 6 months to a year after. Like, we go to some conferences that we see closes 8, 9, 10 months later, just because sometimes there's a longer sales cycle, just depending on the size of the organization that we work with. And that's okay, right? But talk to me a little bit about what was the result?
I'm sure I sound pretty naive on the conference expo circuit here based on how this went, but I wasn't brand new to it was the funny thing. But I was for these products and this setting. And so a few key differences, right? So I came in, essentially wanting to do 3 things. I wanted to promote our brand and more, whether we're retailing other people's products or our own, but promoting our brand. Promoting the knowledge, because we're decently well known in the space, that we now have our own line of products. So our products specifically. And then selling some or laying the groundwork to sell some in the future. And again, I sort of had this loose goal that I'd like this thing to pay for itself. I don't need to make money off of it, but if I spent, I think it ended up being about $25,000 on this first one to do the expo, I'd like to make about $25,000, and that was selling them there. And we were actively collecting email addresses that we knew we would be email marketing to afterward with discounts and promos to sell these tents. I had no specific goals around, how many people got in them or how many people came to the booth or anything like that, mostly because I had no idea what to expect. And so it would have felt like a futile exercise to try and put some goal to that. And so the results, I can say, because as you said, it's not always the sales there. You can close things 6 months later, but we gave everyone who came by our booth a discount code. I assume they would have used it because it was pretty generous. It was unique to the expo. And so I think I can say with a decent degree of certainty that based on our $25,000 expo, we sold 1 tent, which means we made about $1,000 off of it. We certainly collected email addresses. Those people are still in our system. I could still close, here 7 months, 8 months later, or a year or 2 years later. But so far, looking at one, I feel like we got a sort of intangible but very small, I'd be pretending to say it's anything bigger than very small, brand awareness. And it was mostly that effect you talked about of there were 300 booths and they stopped by our booth, and for 2 minutes they knew Overland Junction and our tents, but then they went and saw 6 additional companies and probably forgot the name by the time they left. People knew we had products, but they could have known that by coming to our website where we were actively promoting it. And so I didn't need to be in one corner of one state for 3 days to get that impact. So all told, I attribute a negligible amount of brand and product awareness, several hundred email addresses that maybe will deliver something one day, and one sale.
A lot of times, I think we look at what competitors are doing and think, well, if they're doing it, it must work, right? Otherwise, why would they go, right? And then we convince ourselves, again, it's another one of those things we've convinced ourselves, well, it worked for all of our competitors, but always asking yourself, what's potentially different about my situation? You're exactly right. Like you're a new product, and sometimes, and again, I never want anything to be taken like from that we talk about on here as this is the gospel in every situation. There are some conferences that probably make sense to go from a brand awareness standpoint and to launch, right? It really depends on the product, how much you want to go in, what you're going to do to launch it, et cetera. Like that, there's a lot of different factors that can go into that. But really understanding, for me, in my current stage, in my current awareness, will this work? And are the things that I'm trying to do going to be possible? And you're not going to be able to know everything, right? Sometimes, like, I love it. You said this at the beginning too. You're like, sometimes you just got to swing. And if you don't take the swing, if you wait for all the information and you don't swing, you're never going to hit the ball, right? And so sometimes you got to be okay with a miss. But there are things that you can ask yourself and begin to think through. Like if something, the one question I'd love anybody to think through, if something just feels like a no-brainer, like if you hear yourself saying, this is a no-brainer, start asking yourself, why do I think this is a no-brainer? And start listing out these things and ask yourself on each of those things, is that a guaranteed fact or is that just my opinion? Right? Because I think when we uncover our biases to this, it makes, actually, this is not 100% guaranteed. And are there things that I could do to figure out, get some more information before I make that decision? So what advice would you give to somebody who is kind of in a similar situation than you? They're trying to think, should I go to a conference? Should I not go to a conference? Should I invest in that? What would be your recommendation to them?
Yeah, well, I like what you just said, which is test the assumptions behind it, because I had a pretty clear one, which was 40,000 pretty good customer profiles here, 3 days. I'm going to close several sales, and that is what seemed like a no-brainer to me, and that is what was just not true. The conversations with other attendees, some competitors, some partners, I did after the fact, after my bubble was burst. I should have had those ahead of time. I could have learned a ton from them. Part of it was our just sort of accelerated timeline. I put those deposits down fast, and I was like, all right, we just got to figure this out, and we'll ask questions later. But if I had done that little bit of research and asking folks, then I at least would have had a better number to have in my head of what the benefits, the financial benefits would be of going versus the costs I was doing. And importantly on that point, and to the taking the swing, I think I still would have gone, even if I had had that info ahead of time, because I never would have known how our brand would do and our products would do at a space like this. And And there are, 3 to 4 of these a year, and they're pretty big events, and all of our competitors are going. So I'd want to know whether there was some benefit to it. I probably would have done it all a lot more efficiently so that I spent $15K instead of $25K. But I think I still would have. But I would have wanted to get more info ahead of time, which would have come from that awareness of, hey, I'm making some assumptions about no-brainers here. And then, I think, I mean, this is going to be somewhat repetitive of number 2, but basically try other ways to get information in advance. So I had only been to one of these as a participant for one day. Spend more time and actually study where are people going and what are they doing and what are they buying. Try and get more info out of the event organizers of like how many people do you actually see buying these higher ticket items. We have a pretty big email list, and a lot of those folks go to these things, and so use them and say who's planning on going, what are you planning on buying there. Do some surveying of our customers to figure that out, to be able to make more informed decisions. And so test your assumptions, make more informed decisions, and then I've already said it, but I do want to repeat it. But still take the swing a lot of the time. Like don't let information scare you out of ever taking the swing. This was a mistake. Whether I shouldn't have gone at all, whether I shouldn't have booked 3 before I knew how 1 was going to go, whether I shouldn't have gone all in to try and make it successful, where I shouldn't have gone in with so little information and strategy that would have helped me. But it's a mistake I've learned a ton from. And, it's going to inform our event strategy going forward. It's going to inform all the other companies in my portfolio's event strategies going forward. It informs just the general mindset of testing those assumptions and not thinking they're no-brainers. And so I'm glad we took the swing, and I still think that risks, should be an important part of the marketing calculation.
George, thanks again for taking the time to come on and share this story. I know a lot of people are struggling with those type of decisions, right? Should we go to this conference? Should we invest? Should we take this swing? And I think a lot of the stuff that we talked about is going to help people think through and make those decisions better. So thanks for the humility and just the vulnerability to come on and talk about a swing that didn't knock it out of the park.
And as I said up front, I'm glad you're doing this. You're making us all focus on it. You're making us be vulnerable because it's important, and we should be talking about how the failures lead to successes. So thank you, Kacy, for doing this. I'm thrilled to be on with you and was happy to share.
Thanks again for listening to the My Biggest Marketing Mistake podcast. We hope you got a lot of valuable insights that you can apply to your business today. And we're not done. We've got a lot more great stories of failure coming your way. So be sure to follow us on Apple or Spotify or wherever you listen to podcasts, or check us out on YouTube. And be sure to leave us a rating and review because it helps a lot. Now, here's what's coming up on our next episode.
These were people trying to help me as a scientist try to package a very complicated technology to the outside world. I let this team have it because we've talked about this 10 times. I look back on that conversation with a lot of regret.